There is no greater tragedy than a person who claims to know God but does not truly seek Him. Many profess faith, attend church, and speak the right words, yet their lives are void of true, intimate communion with the living God. The world is full of distractions, pulling hearts away, filling minds with noise, and drowning out the voice of God. But the ones who truly know Him, the ones who walk in His power, are those who have learned to be alone with Him in secret prayer. Look at the life of Jesus. Though He was fully God, He would rise early before the sun, withdraw from the crowds, and seek the Father in solitude. He did not allow the demands of people to keep Him from prayer. He did not let the urgent outweigh the essential. He knew that to walk in the will of the Father, He had to be alone with Him. And if the Son of God needed this time of prayer, how much more do we? The greatest enemy of prayer is distraction. The world is always calling, always demanding attention. Work, entertainment, relationships, responsibilities, there is always something pulling at you. And if you do not discipline yourself to seek God, to shut the door, and to be alone with Him, you will never know the depths of true prayer. You may say that you pray, but are you really meeting with God? Are you truly seeking His face, not just His hand? Do you long for His presence more than you long for comfort, success, or the approval of men? The strength of a man or woman is not found in public ministry, in eloquent speech, or in outward displays of faith. It is found in the secret place, in the quiet hours before dawn, in the moments where no one is watching. That is where battles are fought and won. That is where the heart is changed. That is where power is given. You cannot manufacture a deep relationship with God. You cannot fake intimacy with Him. It is either real or it is not, and the evidence is found in whether you seek Him in secret. Some cry out for revival, for God to move in their churches, in their cities, in their nations. But revival does not begin in large gatherings. It does not begin with great preaching or powerful singing. It begins in the hidden place, on the knees of those who will not let go of God. Those who have tarried in prayer throughout history, who have wept for souls, who have sought Him when no one else would, those are the ones through whom God moves. God is calling, but will you answer? He is waiting, but will you come? Will you put aside the distractions? Will you forsake the noise? Will you get alone with Him, shut the door, and pray? Because those who do will never be the same. There is something powerful about being alone with God. The modern world has conditioned people to fear solitude, to always seek distraction, and to fill every quiet moment with noise. But God has always worked in the lives of those who separate themselves from the world to seek Him. From the beginning of time, He has called His people to step away, to be still, to know that He is God. And yet many today have lost this discipline. They have forgotten that to know Him deeply, to walk in His power, and to hear His voice, they must first learn to be alone with Him. Prayer is not meant to be a public display of religion. It is not meant to impress others, to be filled with vain repetitions, or to be rushed through as if it were an obligation. True prayer happens when a person shuts out the world and steps into the presence of God. This is where real communion takes place, where burdens are lifted, where strength is renewed, and where hearts are transformed. It is in these quiet moments away from distractions that a person begins to understand who God truly is. Throughout Scripture, God called His servants away from the crowds before He ever used them mightily. Moses was alone on the mountain when he met with God and received the commandments. Elijah stood before the Lord in the stillness after the fire and the earthquake had passed. David, before he was ever king, spent years alone in the wilderness seeking after God. Jesus Himself, though surrounded by multitudes, would often withdraw to desolate places, to be alone with the Father. The pattern is clear. Before God moves in power through a person, He first brings them into deep, private fellowship with Himself. The enemy understands the power of this kind of prayer, which is why he works tirelessly to prevent it. He fills lives with distractions, makes schedules busy, and provides endless entertainment so that people rarely sit in stillness before God. Many wonder why their spiritual lives feel dry, why they lack direction, or why they feel distant from Him. Yet they never take the time to truly seek Him in secret. They offer rushed prayers spoken while doing other things, but they never truly quiet themselves before the Lord. There is no substitute for being alone with God. No sermon, no book, no spiritual event can take the place of personal, intimate time spent with Him. A person may be surrounded by Christian activity, may be involved in ministry, and may know all the right theology, but without deep, private prayer, their soul will remain weak. It is in the secret place that faith is strengthened. It is in the secret place that the presence of God becomes real. It is in the secret place that a person moves from knowing about God to truly knowing Him. Those who have encountered God in the quiet, Those who have met with him in solitude understand that nothing else in this world compares. They do not need to be convinced to pray, they long for it. They do not see it as a burden, but as the greatest joy. And this is the kind of prayer that changes lives. Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was the most powerful man to ever walk the earth. He healed the sick, raised the dead, cast out demons, and spoke words that carried divine authority. Crowds followed him wherever he went, desperate to hear him, to touch him, to receive something from him. Yet, despite the demands of ministry, despite the constant needs of people, he would often withdraw to be alone with the Father. If Jesus himself, fully God and fully man, needed this time of solitude and prayer, how much more do we? His life was marked by prayer. Before major decisions, he prayed. Before miracles, he prayed. Before suffering the wrath of God on the cross, he prayed. Prayer was not an afterthought for him, nor was it simply a religious practice. It was communion with the Father. He did not pray because he had to. He prayed because he wanted to. He longed for fellowship with the Father above all else. Many today claim to follow Christ, yet their lives look nothing like his. They claim to be his disciples, yet they do not prioritize what he prioritized. They want power, but they do not pray. They want wisdom, but they do not seek the one who gives it. They want to be used by God, but they do not spend time with him in secret. If Jesus, in all his perfection, withdrew to pray, how can we, in all our weakness, neglect it? The Gospels repeatedly show him stepping away from the crowds, going to the mountains, waking before the sun, and even praying through the night. This was not a one-time event, it was a lifestyle. He did not wait for a convenient moment to pray, he made time. He did not let the pressures of life push prayer aside. Instead, he built his life around it. When his disciples saw him pray, they did not ask him how to preach or how to perform miracles. They asked him, "Lord, teach us to pray." They saw that his power, his wisdom, and his unshakable peace came from his time alone with the Father. They realized that the secret to his life was not merely in what he did publicly, but in what he did privately. This is where many fail. They want the power of Christ, but they do not want the prayer life of Christ. They want his miracles, but they do not want his discipline. They want his closeness with the Father, but they do not want to rise early, withdraw from distractions, and spend hours alone with God. They want to be strong, but they refuse to go to the only source of strength. The secret to a victorious Christian life is found in the quiet place where no one is watching, where no one is applauding, where it is just a man or woman before the throne of God. The greatest men and women of faith were not made in public, they were made in private. They were shaped in hidden prayer, in the early hours of the morning, in the late hours of the night, in the moments when they shut the door, silenced the world, and sought after God with all their hearts. If Jesus could not live without prayer, neither can you. If he needed to be alone with the Father, so do you. Until prayer becomes your priority, you will never walk in the fullness of what God has for you. Many approach prayer as if it were a ritual, something to be done out of obligation, something that must be scheduled into the day, something that, if neglected, brings guilt rather than longing. But prayer was never meant to be a lifeless duty. It was never meant to be a mere practice of religious discipline. True prayer is the expression of a heart that longs for God. It is the outflow of love, the response of a soul that has tasted and seen that the Lord is good. A man does not have to be forced to speak with the one he loves. He does not need to be reminded to spend time with someone who is dear to him. When love is real, communion is natural. So it is with prayer. If a person truly loves God, they will seek him. They will not have to be convinced, because their heart will long for him more than anything else in this world. Many struggle to pray because they have never known God in this way. They see him as distant, as a mere concept, as a being they acknowledge but do not truly experience. But when a person comes to know God, to truly know him, their heart is forever changed. Prayer is no longer something they feel they must do. It becomes something they cannot live without. This is why many grow weary in prayer. They come to God with lists of requests, with religious words, with formulas they have been taught, but their hearts are not truly engaged. They treat prayer as a transaction, not as communion. But God is not merely a giver of gifts, he is the gift. He is not merely the source of blessings, he is the blessing. And when a person understands this, their prayer life is transformed. The measure of a person's relationship with God is not found in how much they know about him, but in how much they seek him. Many can quote scripture, many can argue theology, many can even teach others, yet their hearts remain distant because they do not truly commune with him. The Pharisees knew scripture better than anyone, yet they did not know God. They prayed long prayers in public. yet their hearts were far from Him. True prayer is not about how eloquent the words are, it is about the posture of the heart. God is not impressed by mere religious activity. He is not moved by outward displays of devotion that do not come from a sincere heart. He looks for those who seek Him in spirit and in truth, those who come before Him not to impress others, but because they cannot bear to be away from Him. A person who truly prays is not concerned with what others think. They are not driven by duty, but by love. There is a great difference between knowing about someone and knowing them personally. A person can study a king, read his laws, and learn about his history, but unless they have walked with him, spoken with him, and known his heart, they do not truly know Him. So it is with God. Many speak of Him, but few have met with Him. Many read His word, but few have truly encountered Him in the secret place. Prayer is the evidence of a heart that has been awakened by God. It is the response of a soul that has been drawn into His presence. It is the highest privilege, the greatest joy, the most precious gift given to man. But those who treat it as a mere ritual will never know its true power. Those who only come to God when they need something will never understand the depths of His presence. But those who seek Him for who He is, who come before Him simply because they long for Him, will never be the same. One of the greatest obstacles to a deep and powerful prayer life is the constant distraction of the world. Everywhere there are voices calling for attention, busyness, entertainment, responsibilities, and the endless noise of daily life. Many people claim they do not have time to pray, but the truth is, they do not make time. It is not that life is too full, but that priorities are misplaced. The reason so many struggle in prayer is not because they lack discipline, but because they allow themselves to be consumed by things that have no eternal value. Distraction is a subtle weapon of the enemy. He does not always attack with outright sin. Sometimes he simply keeps people too busy to seek God. He fills their schedules with endless tasks, their minds with countless worries, and their hearts with desires for temporary things. He does not need to destroy them with wickedness if he can simply keep them from the presence of God. A person who neglects prayer, not because of rebellion but because of distraction, is just as powerless as one who has turned away completely. The world is designed to pull people away from the secret place. Social media, entertainment, and the constant pursuit of success drown out the voice of God. Many wonder why they do not hear Him, but they never silence the noise around them. They wonder why their faith is weak, but they never take time to be strengthened in His presence. God speaks, but only those who are still before Him will hear. He reveals Himself, but only those who seek Him will find. Throughout Scripture, God calls His people to separate themselves from the world to seek Him. He told Israel, "Be still and know that I am God." He called Elijah away to the wilderness before speaking to him in a still, small voice. He led Moses to the mountain to reveal His glory. He sent John the Baptist into the desert, away from the distractions of society, to prepare for His calling. Those who have truly known God have always been those who withdrew from the noise to seek Him in solitude. Yet many today treat prayer as an afterthought. They attempt to pray while multitasking, giving God only the scraps of their attention. They speak words but do not truly engage their hearts. And then they wonder why their faith feels empty, why their prayers seem powerless, and why they do not experience the presence of God. But God does not reveal Himself to the half-hearted. He does not move in power in the lives of those who give Him only what is left over. He meets those who seek Him with all their heart, those who are willing to turn away from distractions and make Him their highest priority. This is why Jesus told His disciples to go into their inner room, shut the door, and pray in secret. Prayer is not meant to be something done casually in passing. It is meant to be intentional, focused, and undisturbed. A person who truly desires to know God must learn to shut the door not just physically, but spiritually. They must shut the door to the world, to distractions, to anything that would pull them away from Him. They must learn to say no to lesser things so they can say yes to the greatest thing. No one drifts into a powerful prayer life. It does not happen by accident. It requires a choice, a deliberate decision to turn away from the things that steal time and to give that time to God instead. It requires discipline, a willingness to fight against the distractions that constantly press in. But for those who make this choice, the reward is beyond anything this world can offer. Those who seek God in secret will find Him. Those who push past distraction will hear His voice. Those who are willing to turn away from everything else to be alone with Him will know Him in a way that few ever do. And once a person has encountered Him in this way, nothing else will ever compare. Many people claim to pray, but few truly seek God. There is a great difference between saying prayers and genuinely encountering God in the secret place. A person can say words, repeat religious phrases, and go through the motions of prayer without ever truly meeting with Him. But those who truly seek Him, those who come with sincerity, with desperation, with a heart that longs for Him above all else, those are the ones who will find Him. God does not promise to reveal Himself to those who are half-hearted. He does not draw near to those who casually mention His name but have no real desire for Him. His word is clear: you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. This is the difference between those who pray as a religious exercise and those who pray as a matter of life and death. True seekers are not content with empty words. They do not settle for surface-level faith. They press in, they wrestle in prayer, they refuse to let go until they have truly met with God. Throughout history, those who have walked closest with God have always been those who sought Him with intensity. Jacob wrestled with God all night, refusing to let go until he was blessed. Hannah wept before the Lord in desperation until He answered her prayer. Daniel continued to seek God even when it could cost him his life. These were not people who simply said prayers, they were people who pursued God with everything in them. And because of that, their lives were marked by His power and presence. Many today wonder why they feel distant from God. They wonder why their prayers seem weak, why they do not experience His presence, why their faith feels dry. But the question is not whether God is distant. The question is whether they are truly seeking Him. A person cannot expect to know God deeply if they give Him only a few rushed moments in prayer. They cannot expect to experience His power if they never spend time in His presence. A deep relationship with God is not formed in convenience, it is formed in sacrifice. Seeking God requires time. It requires shutting out the world, turning off distractions, and giving Him the best hours of the day. It requires coming before Him, not just with requests, but with a heart that longs for Him. The greatest reward of prayer is not the answers received, it is God Himself. Many people pray only when they need something, treating Him as if He were a mere provider of blessings. But those who truly seek Him understand that He is the blessing. To know Him, to walk with Him, to experience His presence, that is the greatest gift. Jesus warned against those who honor God with their lips while their hearts are far from Him. Many say they love God, but their actions prove otherwise. They can spend hours on entertainment, on social media, on conversations that have no eternal value. Yet they claim they have no time to seek Him. The truth is, people make time for what they love. If a person truly loves God, if they truly hunger for Him, they will seek Him. They will not have to be convinced because their heart will drive them to His presence. God is not found by the passive. He is not encountered by those who seek Him only when it is convenient. He is found by those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, by those who are willing to set aside everything else to pursue Him. This is the kind of prayer that changes lives. This is the kind of seeking that brings revival. Those who seek Him with all their hearts will find Him, and when they do, they will never be the same. There is a kind of prayer that changes a person. It is not casual, it is not shallow, and it is not merely religious habit. It is the kind of prayer that brings a man to his knees, that makes him tremble in the presence of a holy God, that leaves him forever changed. It is the kind of prayer that does not let go until God moves, that does not stop until there is an answer. This is the prayer of a man who is desperate for God, a man who understands that apart from Him, there is no life, no power, no hope. Many pray, but few truly pray. Many say words, repeat phrases, and go through the motions, but they do not truly enter into the presence of God. Their prayers are routine, lifeless, and weak because their hearts are not truly engaged. But when a person comes to God with desperation, when they cry out to Him, not as a ritual, but as their only hope, everything changes. This is the kind of prayer that heaven responds to. This is the kind of prayer that shakes nations. Throughout Scripture, God has always responded to those who seek Him with this kind of intensity. When Elijah prayed, he did not offer empty words. He prayed with power, with fire, with a heart that knew the God he was speaking to. When Hannah cried out to God for a son, she was so desperate in prayer that the priest thought she was drunk. When Daniel prayed, he did not stop even when his life was threatened. When Jesus prayed in the garden, his sweat became like great drops of blood. These were not ordinary prayers. These were the prayers of those who knew that without God, nothing else mattered. This is the kind of prayer that is missing in many lives today. People are content with weak, routine prayers that barely touch the surface. They pray without focus, without passion, without expectation. And then they wonder why they do not see God move in power. But God is not moved by empty words. He is moved by a heart that truly seeks Him. He is moved by those who hunger for Him, who refuse to be satisfied with anything less than His presence. The greatest enemy of this kind of prayer is complacency. Many people live their lives with no true hunger for God. They are satisfied with a shallow faith, with a prayer life that is dry and lifeless. They do not press in, they do not wrestle in prayer, they do not persist until heaven moves. But those who have truly tasted the presence of God know that there is nothing in this world that compares. They know that once they have encountered Him in prayer, they can never go back to empty religion. There is a difference between praying and prevailing in prayer. Many pray, but few prevail. Few press in until the answer comes, until the breakthrough happens, until the presence of God fills the room. This kind of prayer cannot be rushed. It cannot be squeezed into a schedule of distractions. It requires sacrifice. It requires time. It requires a heart that is willing to lay everything else aside just to be with Him. The men and women who have been used mightily by God throughout history have always been those who knew how to pray in this way. They were not great because of their talent, their knowledge, or their position. They were great because they knew how to get on their knees, how to cry out to God, how to seek Him with everything in them. And because they did, God moved in their lives in ways that shook the world. Those who truly long for God will pray in this way. They will not be content with lifeless words. They will not settle for anything less than the fullness of His presence. They will press in, they will seek, they will knock until the door is opened. And when it is, they will know that they have found what they were created for, to know Him, to love Him, to walk in deep communion with the living God.